Hi everybody. I was handing out information about the bills and issues we're going to be talking about tomorrow for the lobbying, and I wanted to go through them, especially for people who are going to be going and doing that lobbying tomorrow. So some of them are general, not specifically about these kind of cases. Some bills that are already introduced that could help with some of the issues with the prisons, in particular, the prison conditions. And then the last sheet is about our issues, but we don't have any bills on that yet, but we want to start talking to the senators about those issues so that when we do introduce a bill, which Steve has been thinking about a lot, and we're going to work on that, when we do, they'll at least have heard about the issues and be more, ready to maybe hopefully support our bill. So the first one I wanted to talk about, we talked about yesterday in the lobbying workshop, is the first, I'll try to do it without my glasses. The First Step Act. This is something that FAM supported a lot, and it would, mainly what it would do is make the Bureau of Prisons place people within 500 miles of their family, because right now they have guidelines where they're supposed to do that, but they don't have to follow those guidelines, and they often, especially in these cases, they do not follow them. So that would help a lot of people. It would also it would increase the use of compassionate release for those people who are over 65 and have some kind of medical issue that's like a chronic condition that's not getting better. Then right now they have, again, those guidelines, but they're not following them for those people. So, for example, I have one person, Dr. Raphael Dafir. He was an oncologist in Syracuse, New York, and I represented him on a couple of things, and he is over 65, and he does have, some pretty serious medical conditions where he should be getting compassionate release. And he got sentenced to like 33 years or something and has quite a few left. And they did not grant that for him because they just didn't follow their guidelines. So this bill that's part of the First Step Act, it's also a separate bill called the Grace Act, but it's also part of the First Step Act. It would make the BOP follow those guidelines, and if they don't either make a decision on these applications, because sometimes they just ignore them, and never even answer whether you're going to get it granted or not. If they don't grant it or at least answer it, you can go to court, which now you can't. You can't go to court on this. So anyway, so the First Step Act would be helpful, and it passed the House of Representatives by a lot of votes, by, I can't read it in here, but 360 to 59. And then what happened in the Senate, and it's kind of strange because usually you'd think that more Democrats would support these bills, but in this case, for whatever reason, it was more Republicans that supported it. And the Senate Democrats got into this political issue where they kind of didn't want to support it just because it was Republicans that were pushing it, which is just dumb, because it's actually going to help prisoners. They're talking about adding some sentencing reform pieces to it, which wouldn't actually affect our cases, but would help other people. And if that happens and it passes, fine. We just want something to pass, like with the prison reform issues. So what we're going to do is ask the senators that we're talking to. We're going to actually be talking to their aides, but we're going to ask for the senators to support the First Step Act, whether it has the sentencing reform parts added to it or not. Either way, we want it passed. And so that's the first thing that we're probably going to be raising with them. And it looks like it may go forward after the election in November, hopefully. So, let's see. The other one I talked about is under federal compassionate release. And that is the bill called the Grace Act. And I already pretty much talked about that because it is also included in the First Step Act. It was, let's see, did it pass the House? Anyway, we're just talking to senators. So we're going to ask them to also support this GRACE Act in the Senate because it might pass separately from the First Step Act, or it might pass as part of the First Step Act. But either way, that will help the older people who have medical conditions to get out early. Then, let's see, there is, well, remember I talked about the DiMaia case yesterday, and that was a good case from the Supreme Court that is helping some people get out early. Only a couple of our people, but a lot of other people who have gun charges. So some of the really terrible senators and the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, they're really upset about the DiMaia decision, and so they actually introduced a couple of bills that would change the definition so that those people don't get out, and so that would be really bad. There's no need for it, so we're opposing those two bills. One is called the Community Safety and Security Act of 2018. We talked about the First Step Act. Does anybody remember what the First Step Act would do? So give me a little quiz. Anybody? Get people closer within 500 miles. That's the main thing to remember about that. And then the other one is the GRACE Act. Does anybody remember what that would do? So, okay, I'll go through more specifics about the GRACE Act. I have to get my glasses to stay on though. Okay, so the GRACE Act, it was introduced in the Senate, and I have the sponsors in here, so a lot of times they want to know that. You can read that. There's 3 of them. And what it would do is allow prisoners to file a motion in court if they were denied compassionate release. And the criteria that they have to meet is they have to be 65 or older, they have to have already served half of their sentence, and they have to have a serious chronic medical condition related to the aging process, which is not likely to improve. There's many people that fall into that category, unfortunately. From 2013 to 2018, there were a lot of people, there were 5,400 applications filed, and only 6% were granted, even though many of those people were totally eligible for it. And many of people who should have been released actually died in prison before the applications were even decided. So in the past, a bunch of senators wrote to the Bureau of Prisons and asked them to grant these applications for people who are eligible, but they just kind of ignored those letters. So now there's this bill which would say if you're eligible and you're denied release, or if they don't even answer your application within 30 days, you can actually file a motion in court. And if somebody's really, really sick, terminally ill, it would make them be released right away. So this was actually passed in the House by a wide margin. It was passed in the House as part of the First Step Act back in May. And it is included in the First Step Act, so it could pass either by itself or as part of the First Step Act. And something to let them know about this is that when people, in general, in our cases, they're not any kind of risk anyway, but even for general prisoners, when they get older, their recidivism rates go way down. Like, they're much less likely to get charged with new crimes. And yet it's much more expensive to care for them in prison because of all these serious medical conditions. So it makes a lot of sense to let them out. So that's the GRACE Act, and also part of the First Step Act. And then I started talking about these two really bad bills that were introduced in order to oppose what happened with the DiMaia decision. So one is the Community Safety and Security Act of 2018, a really terrible bill that would rewrite the definition of crime of violence to automatically apply to a whole bunch of crimes where there's no actual violence, including conspiracies, which happen in a lot of your loved ones' cases. And it would greatly increase the sentences for those offenses. And somehow they pushed that through the House without any debate or hearings, and it's now pending in the Senate. So we really want to try to stop that one. And there's another one called the Restoring the Armed Career Criminal Act. It probably wouldn't apply too much to our cases, but it would impose a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence to anyone convicted of an illegal possession of a firearm who also has 3 prior what they call serious felonies, but they're going to start applying that to pretty much any felonies and say that they're all serious. So it would hurt a lot of other people. Yeah.
If this passes, will those guys go back to prison?
The question was, if this Community Safety and Security Act that already passed the House passes, would it make people who've already been released, like Safola Chapman and Masood Khan, go back to prison? And I don't think so, but it would depend on how it was written. If it was written to be, actually it can't be. It can't be because of the ex post facto clause in the Constitution. You can't impose punishment retroactively, so it would not.
It's still under appeal because that hasn't been decided yet.
Yeah, well, they could lose their appeal possibly, but this bill shouldn't affect them. It can't be applied retroactively.
What's the name of the bill?
The bill is the Community Safety and Security Act of 2018. It was rushed through the House, and it's now, I think, actually I don't have a number for it in the Senate, so I'm not sure if it's been introduced in the Senate. It happened so quickly.
It says S3335 here.
That is the other one, the Restoring the Armed Career Criminal Act. So, but they're both really bad. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and there's not a bill about it, but there's been a lot of talk about the problems with solitary confinement. And there were hearings in 2012 and 2014 where Senator Dick Durbin had a lot of people testify about how horrible solitary confinement is and how it increases mental illness or causes mental illness. And there was a report in 2017, particularly looking at how it was used for people with mental illness, and they found a lot of abuses with that. So the BOP has been told, to try to use it less, and actually Obama banned it for juveniles, but now there was a bill, actually it may still be, because this bill was introduced in 2016. It was called the Solitary Confinement Reform Act. I think it needs to be reintroduced. It may still be, because I guess when they get introduced, they can be pending for 2 years, but this year's ending soon, so it would need to be reintroduced. The Solitary Confinement Reform Act, to reduce the use of solitary confinement. And also special administrative measures, SAMs, that Mariam's brother was under for a long time. There's, we need to try to, there's not a bill on that, but it's used on a relatively small number of prisoners, but for those it's used on, it's really, really horrendous. It prohibits almost all communication. Like Mariam was talking about, she couldn't even talk about her conversations with her brother when he was under that. And it's just really horrible, and there's no reason for it in most of the cases. So we need to change that so you can go to court and challenge it more easily too. All right, the last page is this page that says reforms needed in national security prosecutions. These are the ones that actually affect a lot of our cases. And We don't have a bill yet, but we're working on that. So we want to raise these issues, especially if they're interested in talking to us, and we'll see how each appointment goes, but we want to try to raise these issues. In our report that we did in 2014, and also a report by Human Rights Watch, we identified these problems. We studied the cases. You already know, like, most of the people are innocent. They didn't actually do anything. There's problems with sting operations. There's problems with material support laws, and there's problems with classified evidence. There's other problems too, but those are the three that I'm talking about in here. And the first one is to change the material support law, because right now you can be convicted of material support to terrorism without having any proof that you supported violence. For example, the Holy Land Foundation, they clearly did not. They were not doing anything. They weren't even supporting the designated terrorist organization, which is required. That they were convicted of that without any proof of that. But they also there was no evidence that they supported violence at all. And in many of the other cases too. So the law could be changed to say that if you're going to get convicted of material support to terrorism, there has to be proof of a specific intent to support violence, like very specifically. So that was actually part of a bill that the ACLU supported around 2009, 2010, but it didn't go anywhere. Or 2011, I guess. It was called the Justice Act. So we need to get that going again. And the other thing that would help is the Entrapment Defense. Right now, in these sting operations where these informants do all these horrible things and manipulate people into saying bad things, people can be convicted without having been doing or saying anything bad before the informant came into their life and started pushing them. So we want to change that and say, look, the way it used to be in sting operations is like in drug cases, it's when they know that somebody's selling drugs, right? They have lots of people who've bought drugs from the person, and so they know they're already doing it, and so they have an undercover informant who goes and buys drugs from them, and then they can charge them, and that's problematic too, but it's at least they were already doing it before. But in our cases, the people weren't doing anything before. They just got suspicious of them and sent that informant onto them, and the informants make lots of money and push them, and a lot of times the targets have mental illness or various ways that they're vulnerable to this, and they just push them and work on them and work on them, offer them money in some cases, all sorts of things. So we need to change that entrapment law so that you can't do that to somebody unless you have evidence that they were already gonna do something beforehand, that they were already like taking steps to do a plot or something before the informant came into their life. So we want to work on putting that in the bill, and that would help a lot of our people. And then we also want to make these things retroactive so that we can go back and open up these cases, because right now we got no legal way to do that. And if we had these laws, if we could get these bills passed, then we could go back and try to reopen these cases. And also that I would add a part about that the government should not be allowed to target people with mental illness in sting operations, because in several cases they know these people have mental illness, and that's why they target them. And like, for example, in the case of Rezwan Firdaus, he had very serious mental illness, and as soon as he started going to a psychiatrist and taking medication, they knew he was about to back out of this plot, and that's when they arrested him, because they knew they were doing it based on his mental illness, and that's something else that really needs to change. And then the third thing in here is something that affects some of the cases where there's classified evidence. Like in our case with Yasin Araf, there was a lot of classified evidence, and we found out later it was false. they were saying that Yassin was an Al-Qaeda member, and it turned out the person they thought he was killed in 2010. But they were giving all this information to the judge, and the lead trial attorney, I couldn't get a security clearance, but the lead trial attorney, Terry Kinlan, got a security clearance just to see this evidence, and the way the law is now, he didn't get to see any of it, because you don't get to see it unless the judge looks at it and says it's favorable to the defense. So the judge is looking at this stuff that's saying Yassin is an Al-Qaeda member, and he says, wow, that's not favorable to the defense, so I'm not going to give it to the attorney. Well, the attorney needs to see it to show its faults, right? That's the Sixth Amendment, the right to confront evidence against you. So it seems like it would be a no-brainer to say that somebody, especially who gets a security clearance, should be able to see that information so they can challenge it. So that's the third thing, and that would help some of the cases. So we're going to try to create, I guess, 3 separate bills that deal with these 3 separate things: the material support, the entrapment defense, and the classified evidence. We don't have them yet, but maybe next year we'll come up with them and we'll try to get them introduced. But for tomorrow, we're just going to start talking about these issues, okay, and how they would help a lot of our people. And so, yeah, so I guess Q&A.
Yes. I just have a quick question. I'm curious. Can you project or take the link? Yeah, I'm just curious, Kathy. You're going to have to answer.
After me? Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. Kathy, I was just curious. Is it you and Lynn that wrote this up? The bill?
I wrote it. We didn't write the bill yet, but I wrote these papers.
Oh, okay, cool. Cool. So is it that it's actually you all introducing this to them?
Yeah, the bill.
Yeah. Was there anything in here?
Are you asking if we
How it came to
the
be?
legislative agenda,
Yeah.
CCF? Yeah.
Right.
this is
Yeah,
our
I mean,
agenda.
some of the stuff I got from FAM actually, like about the First Step Act, and
She's asking, like, how did we come up with this information, I guess, right?
Yes.
So some of it I got from FAM by going to their website and looking at what they're advocating for and looking for the parts of that would help our cases, which is mainly the prison reform stuff and the compassionate release stuff. And then I read a lot of stuff, so I got some stuff from other things. And then the parts about our cases, I just learned from studying them and wrote them up. But like one of them was part of a bill before. The material support part just didn't go anywhere.
And just a legal trajectory, timeline-wise, it's already been introduced, right?
What?
Which
Yes.
bills?
All right, so the first, so we're just talking to senators. The First Step Act already passed the House. We're trying to get it to pass the Senate. It's not even introduced in the Senate yet because they started arguing over what to put in it. Some people wanted to put sentencing reform in it, which would be fine if it could pass with that. We want it to pass one way or the other. So that's the First Step Act. Also, those other 2 really bad bills, one of them passed the House already and they're trying to get it in the Senate too. So all the ones, so the 2 bad ones and the First Step Act, we're trying to get we want the First Step Act to pass the Senate, and the other 2 we don't want to pass the Senate. We're all dealing with the Senate this time. And the ones that I just talked about now, nothing's introduced. We don't have a bill yet for the material support and entrapment and classified evidence. We're just talking about the issues. Oh, in solitary confinement, there is a bill, but it has to be reintroduced, I think, in January.
Okay, my question is, the way that the votes have been broken down in Congress, in the House when it passed, is it just across party lines, or is it partisan?
So the First Step Act, I think even more Republicans supported it than Democrats, but it passed by a really wide margin, so 360 to 59, so definitely bipartisan.
And the divide, the bad ones mainly is what I'm wondering about.
Yeah, I don't know, it was the bad one that passed the House It was just rushed through, and I would think it was more Republicans supporting it, but
Democrats opposed it or not.
the House is mostly Republican right now. I don't even know the breakdown of the numbers. I'm not really very experienced about the lobbying and what's going on in Congress. I've just been studying these issues, but mostly Republicans passed that bill, and they can pass bills in the House without having Democrats support it right now. And maybe, hopefully, that will change drastically in November, very soon, when the election happens, and we talk about a blue wave and flipping the House, hopefully. So we'll see. But it's also not like the Democrats are our friends and the Republicans are our enemies here. Like, the First Step Act had more support from Republicans. So we have to look at each issue and how the breakdown is with the different, political,
Well, it would be good if a Republican opposed one of the denial ones, so that you could just say, oh, well, these Republicans were against it.
yeah, and there may well be, I think in the Senate there's some Republicans that are in favor of criminal justice reform, like Grassley even, and like Cornyn, that we met with his people last year, and it maybe helped to push them in that direction. Cornyn, yeah, and I thought they were bad, but they're actually supporting some of these reforms, so you can't make assumptions that they're bad just because they're Republican, or that they're good just because they're Democrat.
After lobbying, we go back to all our states, we can still go make appointment with the city office and power.
Yes, that's a really good point, that, just going and talking to them once in Washington doesn't really accomplish much. You have to follow up with them. So back in the home district, you can go and make appointments. These are senators, so it's just in your state, anywhere in your state. You can go to one of their offices and make an appointment and say, hey, I met with you in Washington and raised these issues. How is the senator, where does the senator stand on these issues, and I wanted to, try to bring other people from the state too, so. And then later we'll do it with the House, where you have to find people in your district. Steve was talking about this a lot yesterday, so. Anybody else? Steve, do you want to say something about that?
Thank you for referencing what I talked about yesterday. I don't know how many people read the 4 pages there, but it outlined a strategy for how we can move from here, talking in Washington, to take it back home to your home state and create in your home state enough of a buzz so that people are starting to talk about it in the home state. That will be picked up by your senator, I guarantee it. Because that's what they do. They keep their ear to the ground back in their home state where they get elected. And they gotta know what people are saying back in the home state. It's much easier for you guys than running down here once a year and talking to your senator. It's much easier to do it in your home state. And that's why a home state strategy very often works, and I think it works particularly well with our kind of an organization. So I urge you to do that, and also to read that kind of strategy, the things you can do in your home state to create a buzz about these issues.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah.
Also, I think the general people, not just the people who have these cases. This is somebody have a drug case or any case, also First Step Act, get people closer. So we do a lot of families with their loved ones, got into trouble, and now they are far away from the home, can't visit them. So maybe we could talk to those people, come with you and try to do those together.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that he's saying that, if we're going to be talking about the First Step Act, it's not just the terrorism cases, that if you know other people in your community that have family members in prison, and this is something we can do through FAM, because now we have this great connection with FAM. You can go on that Facebook page that they have for the families, whatever it's called, but you can go on that and say, hey, we're going to meet with Congressman so-and-so, and who's in that district that wants to come with me, and talk about the First Step Act and talk about these other issues too. That's a really good point.
So yesterday we talked a lot about messaging and sticking to the point and kind of just pushing the bills that are already in consideration. So what kind of strategy do you recommend for wanting to talk about material support and solitary and, our terrorism cases, while also sticking to, the First Step Act messaging and not sort of muddying the waters and all that, so, yeah.
I'm going to let Steve answer that because he has a lot more experience with actually lobbying than I do, but I think it depends on how receptive they are.
Yeah, I would agree with Kathy on how receptive they are. I would stick with the bills that are actually introduced, the GRACE Act, the STEP Act, because these are things that we can talk about convincingly, and they have a bill. There's something there to focus on. That doesn't mean if they show interest and they'd like to find out more about your experience, you could talk about these other issues. But I think as initially, you can't ask them to do very much. And it was just like Ahmed was saying yesterday, the whole point is the final thing. I want you to support this particular whatever it is, and these other bills we don't have yet. So let's just focus on the bills that are out there. Next year may be different. The other thing that I think is really important is that you get to identify the group that you're with, that is, CCF, and identify other kinds of things so that in their mind they know that there is an active group out here pressing this stuff. Later when we come back, and I'd like to be back sort of in their face once a month somewhere, either in the Home Office or in Washington, they will continue to be interested, and you can kind of expand on what you talked about before. But as this introduction to get there, I just think we'll do much better if we just focus on the bills with numbers that they can actually vote for or not vote for.
And can we all commit to make appointments in our home states, our hometown?
Absolutely critical.
I never do that, but I'm actually going to do it this time. So can we all raise our hands and promise to do it? Okay, great. I'm going to follow up, and I'm putting myself on the hook too.
So the other thing, I liked what Hamid said yesterday about when you go into these appointments, know how you're going to do each appointment in advance, who's going to talk about what. So we haven't really sat down. Maybe if we have time, we could have a meeting with the people who are actually doing the lobbying, or maybe a little later, I don't know, but like divide up, because we can't all go to every single appointment. So figure out which group is going to go to which appointments, and then divide up like who's going to say what and what's the ask for that particular. I mean, the asks are going to be pretty much the same for each one, but figure out how that's going to go, so we're not trying to do it on the fly like we kind of did last year.
Just the one other thing that I would mention is that if we're trying to get a bill passed and down the road, hopefully within a little while, we'll have some bills together that we can try to get passed. You have to assume that this is a 5-year project at least. That means if you meet a couple of times a year at your home district with your person, I mean, we're talking about 20, 30 visits. That's how well you're going to have to get to know these folks. So what happens this time isn't that important. That is to say, you need to get an introduction in, you got to be able to talk a little bit articulately about the bills. But we're going to be pushing on this for 5 years. I don't see any other way that we're going to get these bills passed. Things are going to change dramatically in 5 years, politically. The Republicans, I think, will lose control of the House. Hopefully they'll lose control of the Senate 2 years from now. All sorts of things are possible. But we've got to start now. We've got to get that agenda in now.
I mean, our families have only got time in there.
We got time, right? Yeah.
5 years compared to some of the sentences our families have.
5 years compared with life is pretty good. Yeah, we can do that. But we just got to get that in our minds. We're not going to get down there once, ask them to do it, and then go home and pretend that we did it. We didn't do it. We got to stick with it for 5 years.